All right. Benny.
Okay. All right, we're going to be in the book of Ruth for the next, I guess, 5 to 6 months.
How we doing?
Unless you guys want to keep going on the book of Philemon or the book of James.
Philemon chapter 2.
All right, I'm going to ask our sister Tanya to read the first chapter of the book. Ruth is right after Judges, the 8th book in the Old Testament.
You went to Samuel, you went to
First.
Now it came to pass in the days when the judges ruled, and there was a famine in the land, and a certain man of Bethlehem, Judah, went to dwell in the country of Moab, he and his wife and his 2 sons. The name of the man was Elimelech. The name of his wife was Naomi, and the names of his 2 sons were Mahlon and Chilion, Ephrathites of Bethlehem, Judah. And they went to the country of Moab and remained there. Then Elimelech, Naomi's husband, died, and she was left and her 2 sons. Now they took wives of women of Moab. The name of one was Orpah, and the name of the other Ruth. And they dwelt there about 10 years. Then both Mahlon and Chilion also died, so the woman survived their 2 sons and her husband. Then she arose with her daughters-in-law, that she might return from the country of Moab. For she had heard in the country of Moab that the Lord had visited his people by giving them bread. Therefore she went out from the place where she was, and her 2 daughters-in-law with her. And they went on the way to return to the land of Judah. And Naomi said to her 2 daughters-in-law, Go return each to her mother's house. The Lord deal kindly with you as you have dealt with the dead and with me. The Lord grant that you may find rest, each in the house of her husband. So she kissed them, and they lifted up their voices and wept. And they said to her, Surely we will return with you to your people. But Naomi said, Turn back, my daughters. Why will you go with me? Are there still sons in my womb, that they may be your husbands? Turn back, my daughters, go, for I am too old to have a husband. If I should say, I have hope, if I should have a husband tonight and should also bear sons, would you wait for them till they were grown? Would you restrain yourselves from having husbands? No, my daughters, for it grieves me very much for your sake that the hand of the Lord has gone out against me. Then they lifted up their voices and wept again. And Orpah kissed her mother-in-law, but Ruth clung to her. And she said, Look, your sister-in-law has gone back to her people and to her gods. Return after your sister-in-law. But Ruth said, Entreat me not to leave you, or to turn back from following after you. For wherever you go, I will go, and wherever you lodge, I will lodge. Your people shall be my people, and your God my God. Where you die, I will die, and there will I be buried. The Lord do so to me, and more also, if anything but death parts you and me. When she saw that she was determined to go with her, she stopped speaking to her. Now the 2 of them went until they came to Bethlehem. And it happened, when they had come to Bethlehem, that all the city was excited because of them. And the woman said, Is this Naomi? But she said to them, Do not call me Naomi, call me Mara. For the Almighty has dealt very bitterly with me. I went out full, and the Lord has brought me home again empty. Why do you call me Naomi, since the Lord has testified against me, and the Almighty has afflicted me? So Naomi returned, and Ruth, the Moabitess, her daughter-in-law, with her, who returned from the country of Moab. Now they came to Bethlehem at the beginning of barley harvest.
Let's just pray. Our Lord and our God, we do thank you. We thank you, O Lord, that You give us this time in which we can come and learn of you. We pray, O Lord, that by way of your scripture, O Lord, that we would be encouraged, that we would see you for who you are, that we will walk away in awe of how you treat your people. And I pray, O Lord, that you would help us remind us, O Lord, that those who are in Christ are your people, and that you care and you look after your people, even in times of distress and calamity. Lord, I thank you for who you are, and I pray that you would guide me in this study. I pray this in Christ's name. Amen. All right, so just a brief introduction. As Tanya has read, this is the book of Ruth. Main people that we're going to be reading on is going to be obviously Ruth, Naomi, and Boaz. In the beginning, we saw Elimelech, we saw Elimelech's sons, and then we saw Orpah. But they're not going to be very prevalent throughout the whole book. The genre of this book is more of a historical narrative. The author is really unknown. A lot of people say that it's Samuel, but really there's no one's certain about who wrote the book. And so it is with the timing and the date of this book, right? A lot of people would say that it was written between 1011 and 931 BC. And essentially this book is a story about how God restores those who look to him with hope, right? And how God is faithful, and really we see kind of the promise and the covenant that God has with his people, right? That he will look after his people and that he will be with his people. And Naomi and Ruth are very ordinary people, and we can relate to what they're going through. And I think it's a nice little book that we can spend a couple months in. So I'm going to be we're going to be focusing on verses 1 through 15. And I'm going to break it up into 3 sections. The first section we see is essentially in verses 1 through 5. And this Naomi just becoming a widow, right? The second section is we see in verses 6 through 18. We'll see Ruth's loyalty to Naomi. And then verses 19 to 22, which we won't get to today, but we see Naomi and Ruth returning to Bethlehem. So that's pretty much the breakout, and we'll start in verse 1. Right? Essentially what we see in verse 1 is the problem or the crisis, right, of the book, and the crisis that the book poses, right? From this problem, that's what the whole book is about, the fact that there was a famine in the land and they know not what to do, and then from there so many things happen. So we'll go on with verse 1. First thing that the book of Ruth does is it provides us the context for the times in which they were living, right? And this is going to help us to understand to a certain extent their present circumstances. First thing we see in verse 1, it says, "Now it came about in the days when the judges governed." And since a lot of you have been in Pastor Pete's several months of Judges, right, in his study during Judges, what do we know about the climate or the environment throughout the book of Judges, or during the time of Judges? What do we know? Yeah.
That everyone was doing what was right in their own sight, and also that there was no governing or ruling body, and they were being attacked all the time.
Okay, good. Yeah. So, what else? What else do we know about the time of the Judges?
It was very unsafe. I think like a lot of, like you said, like it was just very unsafe for yeah, it was just very unsafe to be out, like it wasn't like you said, a good environment, like it wasn't a safe environment necessarily.
Anyone else? Yep.
It was a secular or a circular thing. What would happen is that they would give him commands that they knew what to do. People would fall into sin. They would cry out. God would send a deliverer or a judge, and he would restore them, and then it would continue in the same way.
Amen. Yeah, so it was really a routine of the same thing going on, you know. And the root of it was the sin in men's heart, right? Most of our problems have, if not all, have to do with the root of sin in our lives. The fact that we're representatives of, that Adam was our representative, and because he represented, we live in a fractured world, and no matter how hard we try and what methods we come up with in this life, apart from God, they're all basically futile, you know, and everything that we touch, we taint, and we mess up. And in the times of Judges, we see just that, where even when judges were appointed, a lot of them failed, you know, even the good ones, the ones that did good, they failed miserably. So we know that the time of Judges is sin is rampant, right? Wickedness is rampant. And can someone read Judges 2:16 to 18, and we'll get a little bit more of a sense of time of Judges. Yeah, chapter 2.
Then the Lord raised up judges who saved them out of the hand of those who plundered them. Yet they did not listen to their judges, but they whored after other gods and bowed down to them. They soon turned aside from the way in which their fathers had walked, who had obeyed the commandments of the Lord, and they did not do so. Whenever the Lord raised up judges for them, the Lord was with the judge, and he saved them from the hand of their enemies all the days of the judge. For the Lord was moved to pity by their groaning because of those who afflicted and oppressed them.
All right, so kind of exactly what you guys said. God has ordained or put in place judges kind of to deliver the people from foreign oppressors. Yet we saw a lot of wickedness. There was a lot of corruption in the midst of all of that. During what time did the Judges happen? Like between what two books? And what was happening before and after Judges? You guys should know this because I think Pastor P went over this. What was happening before judges were appointed? Who was in place?
King?
I believe that was Joshua.
Okay.
Yeah.
Ding ding ding.
It was at the end of Joshua. Joshua was old, and then I don't remember the other book.
Okay. So, yeah.
According to the judge, the judges have that. They must have some kind of experience before they could appoint them as a judge.
Yeah, that's true. I mean,
God
God
appointed someone as a judge that will have that experience.
Okay. Anyone else want to answer what? So, it was, right after Joshua, then judges were appointed. Then after that, we had.
Here's the last judge, Samuel, and then we go into the kings.
And then we go into the kings, right? And then we see the first king, essentially, and that's how the Israel were kind of represented through kings. So we kind of see, and we learn the context in which Ruth and Naomi are kind of in Elimelech, right? It wasn't a good time. It says not only were they living during the time of the judges, but it says that they were that there was a famine, right? So they were in the midst of a famine. And from a theological perspective, famines could be explained as an act of judgment from God, right? We read in someone who can read loud, go to Deuteronomy 26. (18 to 20), and then someone can read Leviticus 26, 18 to 20, and then Deuteronomy 28, 23 to 24.
I have to remember.
Huh?
Deuteronomy.
Who has Leviticus?
I have Leviticus.
All right.
18 to 20.
Yeah.
And if in spite of this you will not listen to me, then I will discipline you again sevenfold for your sins. And I will break the pride of your power, and I will make your heavens like iron and your earth like bronze. And your strength shall be spent in vain, for your land shall not yield its increase, and the trees of the land shall not yield their fruit.
Right. So we see in verse 20, essentially, he would bring famine upon the people as an act of judgment for disobedience. And Leviticus is specifically talking about what the result is when we disobey God, right? When the people of God go after other gods and continue to rebel against God, he gives them over to their enemies, but he also brings famine among the land, so that it's an act of judgment, but also an act of mercy or grace, where he's trying to where God uses that to pull you back in, to realize that apart from him you are nothing. He did that several times in the Old Testament. Someone want to read Deuteronomy
28, 23.
28, 23 to 24.
And the heaven which is over your head shall be bronze, and the earth which is made under you iron. The Lord shall make the rain of your land powder and dust. From heaven it shall come down on you until you are destroyed.
Right? Again, reinforcing the idea that it is an act of, from a theological standpoint, famines were an act of judgment from God. And this is the time in which Naomi and Ruth and Elimelech are all kind of in. So we learn that because of the famine, the husband, which obviously is leading the family, Elimelech, leads them from the city of Bethlehem in Judah to Moab during the time of the famine. Obviously, we know that Elimelech's family wife is Naomi, and then he has two sons. And they go with him, and his two sons go with him. So there are a couple of ironies here amongst just the first couple of verses. The first being that the name of Bethlehem means
House of bread.
Yeah, house of bread, or granary of bread, right? But unfortunately, they're in a famine. So currently, there is no food for this family. That's why they were in a famine. So Bethlehem is named the house of bread that runs out of bread. So that's the first irony that we see. And Bethlehem is kind of faced toward Moab. So you have kind of the wilderness right in front of them, right, and then right after that you have the Dead Sea, and then Moab is right over. So it's overlooking Moab in a sense, or it's in that direction. So it makes sense why Elimelech goes this way. So Elimelech and his family are in the midst of a famine, and he takes his family and he brings them to Moab. Another irony, and does anyone know why it's a big deal that he's going to Moab? Yeah, it's a pagan nation. Yeah, you want to say something?
Talking about, I don't know, is Muhammad talking about and Ruth, and the farming of the land, and he says that Ruth wants to marry He wants to marry Ruth or something.
Yeah,
They
so
do-
we're
and
gonna get to that in the later chapters, but right now we're just focusing on why is them going to Moab a big deal? You want to say something?
Is it because they're trying to escape the famine?
They're trying to escape the famine. Anyone else wanted to pitch in? Yep.
Because Moab was cursed to the 10th generation by God.
So Moab was a cursed city, right? Obviously Moab they were worshiping other gods. They weren't worshiping the true God. So the irony here is that Elimelech, his name is "My God is King," which obviously is representative of the person who named them, his parents or whoever named them, right? Whoever gave them the name. It says something about them, right? That they believed in God. They believed in Yahweh, and so they named their child "My God is King," Elimelech, right? Strangely enough, though, his name meant that God was king, but he was acting in the contrary, right? He leads his family out to the land of Moab, out to, it's because of the famine, he's leading them away from the people of God and God himself, right? And just as we discussed in the book of Leviticus, if the people would repent, God would withdraw his anger, and he would lift up, he would get them out of the famine. And it seems like Elimelech, instead, he decides to come up with his own solution. What's the solution? Get away from where there is a famine and go to a place where there is food, even if it means that they worship other gods, even if it means that they are a land that is cursed. Yes.
So to me, I could see like a bit of disobedience, because in 1 Kings 17, Elijah the Tishbite goes to the river Cherub, and there's a famine. In James 5, he prays to God that it wouldn't rain, and he stays there until the river dries up. So he's being so obedient, and then he moves on with like more or less God's command. He stays there. Were you trying to bring out what you were saying, that maybe he should have stayed there?
Oh, yes.
Because they double back, yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry, I stole your thunder, son.
Yeah, no. Good point. So, I mean, essentially that's what I'm hinting at, right? And we'll see it as we go on to the rest of the book. But essentially, he did what many of us would do, right? When we're going through struggles, do we consult with the Lord, or do we just seek out our solutions on our own, right? And carry out those solutions, even if it means compromising on our faith or compromising on the Lord. We're guilty of it, right? That's the reality. In what ways? And what are some practical ways, or some ways which we do that? Yeah.
Sometimes when we feel down, sometimes we forget to pray to God to help us with the strength. We just dwell on our problem without thinking of saying prayer, and God would help.
Yeah.
Will help us.
Yeah. Exactly. What other ways do we?
I mean, concerning money, whether fudging on your taxes, or cutting corners, or not being honest in areas to benefit yourself in some way.
Yeah, that's definitely true. What other ways? I mean, this is a very practical illustration here. Like, they were in a famine, so they were leaving because of food. We go through the same struggles in terms of food, shelter, finances. We do things, and we come up with solutions to meet our practical needs. And many times it is an act of disobedience. Yes.
Not waiting upon the Lord, say, for example, going to the relative's house instead of church on a Sunday, if they want us over there. So we yield to that, figuring that we could do that and be liked by the family, when the command is to to be here with the brethren, so we fold up on that. We fold up on the world. The world is very enticing. The world is the big test by the church. Most of the churches, I'm not saying this church, anyone listening with their antenna, the churches are in the world, and so therefore you're driven out, and that's one of the tests, the world, as far as the two tests if you're born again.
Yeah.
Can you just repeat your question?
Yeah. What ways do we do, similar to Elimelech, where we find ourselves in a crisis, and we come up with our own solution without consulting the Lord? Yeah.
I guess an example for me is when some people move, like they're having financial difficulties, they move to another state or another area. That's not a problem, but there's no church there. They don't even think about a church. It's like, well, I have a financial need. I'm going to move to, a state that's better, but they have no church they go to.
Exactly.
It's like you're leaving God to go to somewhere else and hope that that'll solve your problem.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's really, it's really a good example, because a lot of people, they consider moving, they consider all the benefits that they're going to get. They consider the amount of money or what their money can get them in another place or another city. And there's so many benefits that may come with it. Your money may last longer. And the last thing, if even at all, is there a healthy body in which I can congregate so that I would be encouraged in my faith? And sadly, unfortunately, a lot of people just don't think about that. They just get up, move, and then they end up reaping the consequences of their bad decision. And so it is with Elimelech, right? He's faced with a crisis, and he takes his family, and he's not only in charge of himself, but he's in charge of his family, and he's making that decision for his family.
But the family and the land or whatever, the people, you don't have food or whatever to feed the people. Only God could help you. God is the one who could provide all things to the people in this family, and they are suffering from whatever is food or whatever they are suffering.
Yeah, and that's
only God could help them.
Yeah, that's true, and I think that's what I'm pointing out. That and I think this is drawing out. No matter the crisis that we're in or challenges that we're facing, bottom line is only God can really help us and provision for us. When we come up with other means or other methods or other solutions without consulting the Lord, a lot of times it doesn't go well, and it didn't go well because of disobedience.
And then he put his family in a very heathen nation.
Yeah.
I mean, a very godless, idol-worshiping, multitude of God nation. He put him in a really spiritually bad place.
Yeah, exactly. So it goes to show, he came up with a solution and he ran with it.
Like Lot choosing Sodom to go into the city.
Yeah.
Letting Abraham take the land outside.
Yeah, and it goes to show, like a lot of times we put practical needs, before spiritual needs, and when we do that, it doesn't work out. We need to consider our spiritual well-being before, or not before, but heavily consider it in combination with our practical needs. Not just practical needs and not spiritual needs. The verse says in verse 1 that he went to sojourn in the land, meaning he was gone for a while, right? Although it wasn't his land, he went to stay there for a while, and he was intending to return back to Bethlehem when it was over. That was his intention. Fortunately, he doesn't make it. So that's the two ironies that we see. Bethlehem, that is a house of bread that runs out of bread, and Elimelech, whose name means my king, my God is king, and he's not acting like it. And a good indicator that this might have been unbelief or sin on the part of Elimelech is that everything went wrong when he goes to Moab, right? We see in verses 3 to 5, they go to Bethlehem. They go from Bethlehem to Moab, only to have Naomi become a widow because her husband dies, right? They escape the famine and they escape starvation, only to meet death, only to meet death on the other side, right? So this is like an irony there, So he dies. So Naomi becomes a single mother. Although we don't know the age of the children, she becomes a single mother. And then we learn that her 2 sons die in the land of Moab, right? And the last people that she could depend on in an earthly sense, her family, has died off, right? The people that could get her through the famine have died off, and now Naomi is left emptied of all her resources. She has no food. Really, she has no home because she's not even within the confines of her home. She's in Moab, and she has no male support to help her out. So that's the situation that Naomi finds herself in. And essentially this book is hinging on these 5 verses and what goes on there. We move on to verse 6 through 18. So verses 6 to 7, we begin to see Naomi's response to the crisis, right? The crisis that she was facing. And we see from verses 1 through 5 and 6, we see an immediate shift in the book, beginning in verse 6, right? In verses 1 through 5, we were seeing an intensification of bad news, right? There's a famine, they move, husband dies, children die, she's without resources. So it's like bad thing after bad thing after bad thing was happening. But now we begin to see Naomi decides to go back to the land of Judah. And from here, she begins to receive blessings from the Lord. And she begins to hear good news. And we see that the main cause for the shift or the transition is that Naomi has heard that the Lord has visited his people in giving them food, right? So essentially what we're seeing here is that hope is being brought to God's people even in the midst of tragedy. Even they were all suffering through the famine. They were all going through it, right? But especially Naomi, because she lost her family, and she hears that God is with the people, and she's providing for the people. And we read in Exodus 4:31. Can someone read that? And if someone can get Zephaniah 2:7.
Lenny, can I ask a quick question?
Yeah.
Does it specify, I know it doesn't say here, but like, is it known about how they died, or is it a direct result of the famine, or?
I couldn't find anything, and it doesn't specify, so I'm not sure.
Exodus 4:7.
Exodus 4:31 and Zephaniah 2:7.
So the people believed, and when they heard that the Lord was concerned about the sons of Israel and that he had seen their affliction, then they bowed low and worshipped.
Zephaniah 2:7.
The sea coast shall become the possession of the remnant of those of the house of Judah, on which they shall graze. And in the houses of Ashkelon they shall lie down at evening. For the Lord their God will be mindful of them and restore their fortunes.
Right, so in both these verses, we're seeing God showing and demonstrating a concern for his people, for the sons of Israel. We see him caring, we see him restoring, right? And that's who God is. He in our times of afflictions and calamity, what does David do? He cries out to the Lord, knowing that God will answer or help him to get through his afflictions. And this, to me, and seeing this in the book of Ruth, it's encouraging, right? And it should be encouraging to all of us, right? That the Lord hears us, that the Lord He is concerned for us, and He sees the affliction of His people, right? When you're going through something, you're not on your own. If you're truly His, you have Him, right? Even more comforting is that He is the God that gets us through the affliction, right? He is the one that we can lay our cares on and we can receive comfort, right? That is super encouraging, and Naomi understands this, and so she goes back to Bethlehem. She decides to go back, and visiting the people here. What that means is He's providing for them, right? Psalm 132:15. Someone want to read that?
I will abundantly bless her provision. I will satisfy her poor with bread.
And he's speaking about his people here. Obviously, we have Matthew 6:11. Give us this day our daily bread. It's a prayer that we ask the Lord because He's our provider, right? He's not only our creator. He didn't just create us and leave us here. He's with us, and we can count on Him to be faithful and to help us endure. And isn't it interesting the difference in mindset that Elimelech had in contrast to the mindset that Naomi has, right? What do you guys notice is the difference between Elimelech and Naomi? What is their difference in mindset? Yeah.
Would you say that the husband was more worldly, where his wife was more spiritual? She was trusting more in the Lord, because now she has nothing. Now the only option she has is to trust in the Lord.
Yeah.
And it's like God showing her how dependent you are on me.
Mm-hmm. Good. Anyone else want to point anything else out?
You said you don't know how these people die, right?
Yes.
But maybe they died through, there is nothing, everything was, the famine or whatever, the fields or the plant or whatsoever, they all dry up, wither up, there's no food for them. So I think the people, they died through, there's nothing for them to eat, so they couldn't survive.
Well, they left Bethlehem to get away from the famine. When they went to Moab, they got away from the famine. So probably not.
I know they went to Bethlehem.
Yeah, but I'm not 100% sure because the scriptures don't speak on it. So
Yeah, but
it's something that we can only speculate.
because nobody knows how they died.
Yep.
Hope I can explain this right. Elimelech left, seeing the famine, but not looking at how God was in control of it.
Mm-hmm.
She was going back, even though she had heard that God, like she understood that the famine or the blessing of food was from God.
Mm-hmm.
Where he left that, thinking he was going to save his family.
Yeah.
He was destroyed.
Yeah. So two different mindsets that they have, and two different results that they have, right? We'll get into the results of Naomi, but obviously, Naomi, Elimelech left because of what was happening currently. He was just thinking about the present, the famine. He was thinking practically, like many men think, right? They just think practically sometimes, and I'm guilty of it. And Naomi was, she was trusting in the Lord. She hears that God has visited her people, and she wants to be in the midst of the Lord, providing and visiting His people.
I have a question. You notice when Moses brought the people out of Egypt,
Yeah.
and when they come out from Egypt, they asked Moses where they would get the food. who's going to provide food for them,
Mm-hmm.
right? They all crying out to him, that who's going to provide it? And then Moses went and prayed to God, and God was the one who provided all the food for them. Yeah, and so we have to put ourselves to God, trusting whatever He's doing for His people.
Mm-hmm.
You understand? That He is the only one you can turn to.
I agree. Yep.
I was just thinking that, and it wasn't like really beneficial for her either way, because she didn't have anywhere to go back to in Bethlehem. Because we're gonna find out later that she's basically begging here, but because it's where God is, because God is blessing them, she wanted to go.
Yeah.
So she's not even looking at it. You can say, oh, well, she's gonna go back home. No, she has nowhere to go home.
Yeah. Yeah. She had to get all that resolved when she gets there.
Yeah.
And the Lord, a lot of times she couldn't see all the way through, right? And we can never see all the way through, right? When we make a decision, when we're struggling, in terms of practical means, we never can see down, how we're going to make it or how everything's going to work out. But God sovereignly ordains everything, and it ends up working out. Like so many stories I've heard of young couples not being able to even they didn't make enough to even pay to move out and pay for rent, and God sovereignly ordains and puts them in positions and jobs where they're making more money and they can move out and everything works out, right? And that's just how God is. We can never see fully down the road, but I think that's the part in which we need to trust in the Lord in, and we see obviously that Naomi is trusting in the Lord. So Naomi hears of this news, and this is the first good news that Naomi has heard in a while, which indicates that there's going to be seasons in which all we hear is what we think is bad news before we can hear good news. And the same thing happens with Naomi. But being that she heard the good news, she runs with it, right? She's immediate in her response, and we see an immediate response after her. Right? It says Naomi's response to the good news is that she arose. Right? She returned from the territory of Moab, and she went out. Right? Three actions. She arose, she returned, and she went out from the place where she was staying. So she clearly understood the implications of the good news and what it meant for her life and what it meant for her spiritual life. And though this news was very simple, it was very basic news, we see that Ruth understands, what it means that God was visiting her people, and she just wants to run. She wants to get back as quickly as possible. And how does this news demonstrate the grace of God? What are some ways besides, just the practical God providing food? What are some ways that we see God demonstrating grace to Naomi?
That the whole family wasn't punished because of the action of the authority in the home.
Amen. Right? Yeah.
God is leading her back to where she can find the other people of God, which she had before, where she can find fellowship and that life she had before. He's graced her with that.
Amen. Yeah.
And her husband died, her sons died, but the rest of her family may still be alive.
Yeah. The little bit of a family that she does have is still alive. Anyone else?
But she's got Ruth. Ruth was a Moabite.
Yep.
And now she wants to go back. That's huge. That's a lot of grace.
Yeah. So we see, just in this little, very simple and straightforward news that God is with His people. We see the grace of God so clearly demonstrated, right? First thing we see, and you guys have mentioned some things, that that in the midst of all the grief and pain that Naomi was going through, she's able to hear good news. She receives good news. And the first thing I thought about, and it's because we just finished Philemon, I thought about Philemon, right? God allows Paul to witness Onesimus come to saving faith and serve alongside him, even though he was in jail, right? He was going through a trial by being in jail. You know, he was essentially, you know, chained for the gospel. That doesn't stop him, though, you know, and that doesn't stop God from allowing him to see God's hand. He's receiving good news, and that in itself is just comforting, and it is encouraging to Naomi, and it was to Paul. The second thing, God intervening on behalf of His people was something that was encouraging, right? Sometimes God intervenes for the bad, right? In a negative way, He intervenes against, He punishes. But in this context, obviously, it's positive, right? He's intervening on behalf of. He's coming to the aid of His people, right? Again, this is comforting for God to intervene on behalf of His people, on behalf of us. Like, we want that. We want God to intervene for us, right? And the Lord Himself is intervening by interceding for us, right? By being our advocate, by being the propitiation. There's no greater demonstration than God's intervention than the cross of Christ. And that in itself is so encouraging. Right? The third thing is He is identified them as His people, right? And just the fact that He's with His people, and the fact that they are His people means that He's not going to forsake them. They may go through some trial. He may discipline them. He may bring down judgment on them, you know, for a season. But He's always going to be with them. He may chastise them and discipline, and He does that with us. He disciplines us, chastises us, allows us He answers some of our prayers in which we realize, hey, maybe we shouldn't have prayed for those things, just so that we can kind of return back to Him and grow in intimacy.
God says in the covenant, I will be your God and you will be my people. Saving faith is what you were saying, with a trust in the truth, assent to the truth, a knowledge to the truth. And we see that in Jeremiah 29, where it says that then you shall call upon me, and I shall go and pray. And if you seek me with your whole heart, you will surely find me. And she had saving faith.
Yeah.
And does it say it there? What you were saying about that trust, and that trust encompasses the truth on assent to the truth and knowledge of the truth and trust in the truth. And that's what she had. She was like trusting, and that's what saving faith is.
Yeah, exactly. It's a trust. We don't know how everything's going to play out, but we do know the character of God. We do know who God is, and that is what we rely on. We rely on who He is, and the fact that, you know, He won't fail us.
All God's promises are yea and amen when you go there and you see these glorious promises. You probably saw those promises when she looked back to the covenant, and when she looked back to Genesis and saw Genesis 3:15. She was trusting wholly in the Lord. That's tremendous.
Yeah, amen. And then we have right before the people go to the promised land, we have in Deuteronomy 31:6. What does it say?
Be strong and courageous.
You gotta be louder though.
Can't hear you over here.
Be strong and courageous, for I'll never leave you nor forsake you.
Yeah.
Well, that's part of the verse.
You got the main thrust. He will not
That's
leave you or
amazing.
forsake you, and And that in itself, you know, the return of God was a signal that he had not forgotten them or rejected them, right? That he was still with them.
And that's underscored in Hebrews 13:7. I will never leave you or forsake you.
Yeah.
Probably whoever the writer was of Hebrews,
Yeah.
we don't know. The same quote.
Yeah, that's really got it from. So we see that as an act of grace. Obviously, the bread, right? A commentator put it this way: the house of bread is being restocked, you know, in Bethlehem, right? So those were all an act of, in ways in which we can see the grace of God in the story of Naomi and Ruth. We move on to verse 8 and 9. And here we begin to see Naomi begins to make headway back to the land of Bethlehem, right? And her daughters-in-law are going with her. You know, they're committed to her. They're following her, and it's like she was on. While they were on their way to Bethlehem. She thinks through all the implications on what it would mean for her daughters-in-law, and what the daughters-in-law would have to face if they came back to Bethlehem. And she starts thinking, and she starts telling them and encouraging them to stay in Moab, right? They're Moabite women. They're from Moab originally, and she's asking them, hey, maybe it's better off for you to stay. And what are some obstacles that these women would face, Ruth and Orpah? What are some obstacles that they would face if they left Moab?
Not being accepted.
Not being accepted? Why?
Because they're not, I mean, the Moabites didn't follow God the whole time, and they weren't from Bethlehem. And wasn't it like the people from there felt like they were self-righteous?
No faithful Jewish man would marry them.
Yep.
Yeah, right.
So the simple fact that they were Moabites means that most people are just going to reject them unless they're obviously their former husbands. They're going to simply reject them because they're not Jewish. They're Moabites.
Yeah, when I was telling you about Ruth was, when she was leaving, and Moab says, don't go, right? He has plenty of land that he want her to marry her so they could develop the lands and plant them or whatever. So, Ruth, as I said, she was leaving, but Moab said no. I want you to go and tell her, don't go, I will marry you. I have plenty of land. Stay and live with me and walk with me.
You mean Boaz, not Moab.
Moab. Moab say, stay with me.
Yeah, but we have like
Yeah.
the next couple months to get there.
No, but just telling you what Ruth was going through.
Yeah, definitely.
You know,
So what other obstacles are they going to face leaving Moab?
Money.
Money? They ain't going to have no money? You want to say something? It says it in, you guys already mentioned it. Well, it says, it gives some reasons. Essentially, Naomi is giving them reasons why she doesn't want them to go. So one of the reasons is that Naomi knew that she would not have any sons to take her daughters-in-law in marriage, right? She knew she's old. She knew she's a widow. She's not having any sons. No one for her daughters-in-law to marry in her family, right? The death of her husband meant the loss of their economic support, right? And experiencing the death of her husband and them being widows themselves meant that they were going to be alienated, right? And many times avoided. So this is why she commands them to go and to return to your mom, to the home of your mother. Essentially, she's saying, go back home and remarry. I give you permission to go and remarry a Moabite man. Like, you can leave me. It's okay. Because she's looking out for their good. She's concerned for them. And it's like she was thinking about this while they were on their way back to Judah. She also knows, as Rose said, they're going to be like aliens in a foreign land, right? Sojourners in a foreign land. Same thing that she was experiencing in Moab is what they're going to experience back in Bethlehem with no husbands, right? So we get to verse 10. In these verses, we begin to see the commitment from Naomi to Naomi from Ruth, right? And here it's a great indicator and demonstration of the commitment to Naomi, but also we're going to learn that it's a great indicator that Ruth was committed to Naomi's God, which is Yahweh, right? She's not only following Naomi for Naomi, but Naomi because of her God, and because she also heard of the good news, and she wants to get back to know this God, to the true God. So they show love to their mother-in-law, and it's kind of hard to think, right? A lot of the times relationships between daughters and mother-in-laws, they don't go very well. There's always tension, there's always animosity, but here we see the two daughters have stuck through with Naomi, and they want to continue to stick through, both of them. At least for now, right? And then once, so their love for Naomi was even greater than their love for the Moabite people, right? They're leaving their city, their place of origin, and they're willing to go back to Bethlehem, even though they have no husbands, and they may possibly be a widow all their lives. They're willing. So it's because of their love for Naomi that they decide to say, hey, we want to stay with you. They're reluctant to leave Naomi alone. And Naomi, what she's doing here is she's building a case. She's presenting and trying to hit them with reality and say, hey, the reality of this situation is that it's going to be tough. And I have no son to give you. And you're going to a foreign land. And you can remarry here and be well off here. So in a sense, she has this tough love for her daughters-in-law. So in these verses, what we're seeing is her building a case, and trying to convince them to stay. Verse 11, what she does is, it says, "But Naomi said, 'Return, my daughters. Why would you go with me? Have I yet sons in my womb that they may be your husbands?'" Essentially, she's asking them a rhetorical question. I have no sons for you. I don't even know that you guys can remarry, right? She's assuming that the only way that they're going to get married is through her sons, and she has none to offer. She follows up on her question, and she calls Orpah and Ruth to be realistic, right? She's too old to remarry. Even if she did remarry, that son would be too young for them to marry. So she's just trying to paint the picture that they can't remarry if they come with her. There's a huge possibility that they won't. And then in verse 13, we see kind of a response to her rhetorical question. "Would you therefore wait until they were grown? Would you therefore refrain from marrying? No, my daughters, for it is harder for me than you, for the hand of the Lord has gone forth against me." So essentially, she just wants them to stay. Obviously, for a lot of you guys, this was the custom, right? This was the custom in Israel, and we see it in Deuteronomy, right? We see in Deuteronomy 25:5, it says, "When brothers live together and one of them dies and has no son, the wife of the deceased shall not be married outside the family to a strange man. Her husband's brother shall go into her and take her to himself as wife and perform the duty of the husband's brother to her." Essentially, your older brother dies, you take on, and you're not married, you take on the responsibility of becoming the husband of his wife. But there was none there were no brothers, there were no sons on Naomi's behalf to take on that role. And this is what she's trying to paint. She's trying to paint that, hey, this can't be fulfilled, so you ought to stay. So she's continually telling them. And in verse 15, what we see is Naomi's commitment to stay. Orpah drops off. She decides, hey, I'm going to stay. I'm going to go back to the land of Moab. If you insist, I'm going. But Ruth decides to stay. And Ruth is, although there's much uncertainty, right, and she's battling her mother-in-law, who's like very strong-willed and wants her to stay, she goes with her. She remains faithful, right? She decides to deny the God of Moab and go after and pursue with Naomi the God of Bethlehem, which is, we all know, is Yahweh. We'll stop there because it's getting, it's almost
Yeah,
time.
but a big verse is the verse before. Like, you see that she cleaved to her, and the other girl kissed her on the cheek, like I always did, I'd never kiss on the lips, and kissed on the cheek, and the other girl cleaved to her, and it's like, reminds me of John, like 10:21, with Jesus, feed my sheep. She saw that was that agape love that she had for her, you see. That's a big verse, right?
Yeah,
That's
and
the next
I think it's no, it's actually it's 14.
Because you went to 15, that's the only reason I interjected.
Yeah, no, it's good that you did. And that's building up to eventually, what we're going to see in the later verses, and I'll touch on that once we get there. Yep.
So I never thought about it until tonight when you were speaking. Evidently, Elimelech was probably not a good testimony to his daughter-in-laws for the Lord, and evidently the two sons weren't, because they married heathen women. But evidently Ruth was. Naomi was, and so how did Ruth know so much? How did she fall in love with the God of Israel? It had to be, I would think, through her mother-in-law, not through her husband, not through her father-in-law, but through her mother-in-law.
Yeah, and it goes to show you, women have a strong influence on their family, right? We have Timothy, who was influenced by his grandmother, right, to come to the faith. So women have this strong influence on their family, and this is just another evidence and demonstration of that.
Lois was the grandmother on Timothy and mother. Timothy's mother and grandmother. His grandmother is mentioned too by the great apostle Paul in Timothy.
Oh,
Lois.
okay. Yeah.
Yeah, I was thinking back on Pastor Peter, is this, because we're talking about widowhood, sons are dying, she's going through all these terrible things. She must have been faithful. She must have been showing joy. She must have been showing how God was still working in her for them to say, hey, all is God. And I think that's a big thing, I think, from those verses that you're getting. That despite all the things that are going wrong, she's so faithful that they see that there's really a God called Yahweh.
Yeah, and a large part has to do with her focus on the good news, the grace of God, right? Like if she was just focused on her situation and present circumstance, just like Paul, if he was focused on his present circumstances, he would not be effective in the kingdom. But it's when we gaze and when we look at the grace of God in the midst of all of our turmoil, we can get through that turmoil. It allows us to persevere.
But Ruth is in the lineage and not Naomi. On Judah, when you look at that lineage, the Lord Jesus, Ruth is there, not Naomi.
And Betty, she could have also stayed in Moab. The daughter, she could have remarried and she could have lived with nothing.
Yeah.
So she's giving, Naomi's giving that up as well.
She was regenerated.
Yeah.
I was going to say, how the people were named in those days, I think was so amazing because their names carried on either, the heritage of their parents or how they were going to live out their lives. Because Orpah's name meant stubborn, and Ruth's name meant friendship. And it was almost like God ordained how they were going to live their lives and how that was going to play out later on. And it was the obedience of the parents to hear from the Lord on how to name their children, and they just acted that right out.
Yeah, and this could be an indication to your question, but the Mahalan and Chilon, I can't recall exactly what they meant, but it was something to do with sickness.
Yeah,
Sickness and
sick.
destruction.
Yeah,
But
so
it says it came to mean that. Like, I don't know if it meant that.
A lot of these names are
After.
a result.
Oh, it came to meaning after?
I had looked it up just a little while ago, and it says, names have come to mean sickness and destruction.
So for example, Jacob became deceitful because of the way he acted. So they didn't name them knowing that. It came to mean that they were.
Because even Naomi said my name means pleasant, but
Naming
don't
your
call
boys
me
Chilion and
Naomi, call me Mara, it means better.
so the names are can be very helpful, and just
What would you name your daughter?
at least in our time to see what their character was, even if it didn't mean that then, right? It helps us to really identify who they are.
Be careful how we name our children.
With that being said, should we sing a song or do we pray?
God gave
Do
me
we
a
pray or we
before you
sing?
went in.
All right, let's pray.
Let's pray, then we'll sing.
You know that? Before the child ain't born.
All right, Catherine, you want to pray?